Hello, folks. This is going to be our lesson on the integumentary system. So if you are following along with my notes that I post for these, the relevant document is the one found in the course documents folder for the class under handouts and lecture notes entitled Integumentary System. So you might want to have that handy so that you can see relevant vocabulary words as I go along here, and also for some of the diagrams, although I will endeavor to screen share relevant diagrams where appropriate. Diagrams I screen share for your convenience so that you can reference them later will be directly out of the handout so that you will be following along with the same content that I'm teaching you with, and that you have something to go back to later whenever you're looking at it if you don't have access to that right now. So what we're taking a look at today is going to be the integumentary system, which is the externally most visible system of the body. When we are talking about the integumentary system, what we are looking at is going to be the skin and its derivative structures. So included in the integumentary system, we have the integuments, which is the formal name for the skin itself. And we also include, under the heading of the integumentary system, all of the so-called cutaneous glands. That is all of the glands that are housed within the skin, sweat glands, oil glands, and so forth. Also included in the integumentary system, we would have your hair, your nails. If you were an animal other than a human, the integumentary system would include structures such as horns, claws, hooves, antlers, which are actually equivalent structures. They're made out of similar things, actually the same substance as your nails. But of course, we as humans do not have those structures. They're not part of our integument. Technically, this is a fun fact, your teeth are derivative structures of the integument, but for purposes of our classification, they are considered part of the digestive system, not part of the integumentary system, and notably, not part of the skeletal system. People often refer to teeth as being a kind of bones, and it's easy to see why you would think of them that way, because they're hard, mineralized structures rich in calcium, anchored to your jawbones. But in point of fact, teeth are not bone. They're made out of different kind of material. They are derived from the integument. They're an outgrowth of the integuments, but we do not consider them integumentary because functionally they are digestive organs. Their role is in the processing of food. So, little fun fact there about where your teeth come from, but they are not considered part of the system we're dealing with right now. The integumentary system is the body's most obviously visible, but also most externally damaged, easily damaged system. The study of the integument, medically and scientifically, is dermatology. Your dermatologist, of course, is your skin doctor. Whenever you see the prefix derm, D-E-R-M, in anything, that prefix means skin. Or sometimes more broadly anatomically, it means outer covering. I have to ask you to all bear with me a little bit today if I'm coughing and sniffling a little bit. I'm suffering from a little bit of allergies today that are a bit worse than usual, some allergies and asthma. So I apologize in advance for the coughing and congestion. All right, now let's start with the most obvious component of the skin, of the integumentary system. Okay, I spoiled it a little bit there, which is the integument, or the skin itself. Now, if you want to be technical, the skin is your body's biggest organ. We don't think of our skin as an organ a lot, but technically that is what it is. It is an organ because, after all, the definition of an organ is it includes two or more types of tissue integrated together. The skin is your body's single largest organ, covering a total surface area of, for the average person, between 1.5 and 2 square meters. And for the average person, you have somewhere around 15 pounds of skin. Now, the skin is variable on your body depending on where you are and how thick it is. Average thickness of your skin is between 1 and 2 millimeters thick, although depending on where on the body we are, it ranges in thickness to between as little as 0.5 millimeters thick over your eyelids to as much as 6 millimeters thick. And that very thick skin is found between your shoulder blades. The skin has 3 distinct layers, from most superficial to deepest. We have the epidermis, prefix epi, of course, means on top of. The epidermis is the outer skin. It's the surface layer. It's what you can see when you're looking at somebody's skin. The epidermis is largely a keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium, thinking in terms of the different tissue types that we've discussed previously. Deep to the epidermis is the dermis. The dermis is a thicker layer than the epidermis. It's the thickest layer of the skin. That is a connective tissue layer consisting of a couple of different kinds of connective tissue. Talk more about that in a moment. And then beneath that, we find the hypodermis. This is the deepest layer of the skin. It is another connective tissue layer, largely consisting of fatty tissue. Depending on where you are in the body, we can classify your skin as being either thick skin or thin skin. And that has nothing to do with the overall thickness of the skin. The designation of thick skin or thin skin relates to how thick the epidermis itself is. And so you can, ironically enough, have places in the body where the skin itself is technically thicker, but it is still what's called thin skin, depending on how thick the epidermis itself is. That you have thick skin. Thick skin has an epidermis with a thickness between 400 and 600 micrometers in thickness. You only find thick skin in a few limited parts of the body. You largely find thick skin on the palms of your hands, your fingers, the soles of your feet, and on your toes. Places that get a lot of abrasion, a lot of direct contact with the world, where the skin has had to thicken up the epidermis to contend with that constant contact and abrasion. Thin skin is pretty much all your other skin. Thin skin has a thickness of the epidermis of only between 75 and 150 micrometers. The much thinner thin skin features many of the features that we associate with skin overall, such as hair follicles, sebaceous glands, which are oil glands, and sudoriferous glands, which are known as sweat glands. You find some sweat glands in thick skin, but not nearly as many. Now we're going to go through the skin layer by layer here and get an idea of what it looks like and what its various components are, because skin is complicated. There's a lot going on in your skin. So let's take a look at it layer by layer and see what's happening. So I'm going to screen share for a second here, and I'm going to show you a cutaway diagram of the different layers of your skin. And this is straight out of your handout. So if you have that handout handy, you'll be seeing the exact same thing I am showing everybody on the screen right now. All right, so here is a cross-sectional view of the skin, and you can see all of the distinct layers. Everything here in the upper layer up to that wavy dark line right about here where I'm running my pointer. Everything from that wavy dark line on up, that is the epidermis. And that is the surface layer. Everything from that wavy dark line on down to where it becomes pale down here. That very thick part makes up about 80% of the skin overall. That is going to be the dermis. And you can see housed within the dermis, there's a lot going on within the dermis. You see the dermis is home to lots of blood vessels. The dermis is home to nerve endings. And you can see that within the dermis, we find Also where lots of glands are going to originate. You can see that you've got coiled up sweat glands and oil glands originating within the dermis, even if those glands have ducts that cut up through the epidermis to empty onto the surface of the skin. You can see your hair follicles originate down within the dermis, even if the shaft of the hair penetrates the epidermis and makes its way up onto the surface of the skin. And then way down here at the bottom, this pale layer, this is the hypodermis, sometimes called the subcutaneous tissue. Now let's work our way down. Let's start in the most superficial layers. And we'll start up here at the top. Up here at the top, we've got the epidermis. And the epidermis is going to be what we see. This is the stratified squamous epithelium. It is a keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, meaning that most of the cells from a certain point on upward are packed with keratin, which is the waterproofing protein that makes the skin water resistant, both keeps the fluids of the outside world out and keeps the fluids of the body in. So that's quite important. Now, the epidermis is almost all cells packed very, very tightly together. Like any epithelial tissue, very little room for extracellular fluid or fiber, mostly just epithelial cells squished very, very tightly together with each other. No blood vessels are found in the epidermis. All of the blood supply for the skin is down in the dermis, deep to it. Very, very few nerve endings in the epidermis. Most of the sensation from the skin is found in the dermis beneath it, which is why you can, run your nails along your skin and not actually damage yourself. You can scrape along the surface of your skin enough that you peel off visible layers, leave tracks in your skin, and that doesn't actually cause you pain or suffering because the nerve endings are down in the deeper layers. Yes, you feel sensation when you do that, but all the sensation you're feeling is deep down. It's in the deeper layers down here, down below. That's where the nerve endings are. In fact, most of the cells in the epidermis are dead cells. They are going to be cells that have been isolated enough from the blood supply in the dermis that they have died. The majority of cells above a certain point in the epidermis are dead. The lowest level cells in the epidermis are still living cells, but once they rise to a certain level closer to the surface, it's all dead tissue. Every part of your skin that you can see is dead cells. Now, that said, the epidermis has several distinct layers of cells. When you look here in our diagram, you can see a bunch of different distinct colored layers of cells, and those layers are there because there's different things going on. As the cells in the epidermis originate from where they begin in the lowest layers with cell division and slowly work their way closer to the skin surface, they form distinct layers with distinct properties. So let's talk about that. Let's begin at the deepest layers of the epidermis and slowly work our way from where those cells originate in its deepest layers to when they eventually flake off of the skin surface as dead cells at the end of their existence. Now, okay, looking at our diagram here, now my screen share is not doing the thing I want it to do. Let me see the screen I am sharing with you. There we go. That is... Okay, you can see it, and now I can't see it. 1 second. I'm going to just stop screen sharing and then resume screen sharing so that I can point out things on the diagram I am talking to you about. That would make life easier. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start at the deepest layer of the epidermis, which is the dark line you see right here, which is the stratum basale. And you see it's spelled B-A-S-A-L-E, but it's pronounced basale. The stratum basale is the bottom layer of the epidermis. You see it's got kind of a wavy boundary between it and the dermis. Stratum basale is a single layer of cells, which even though the epidermis is a in general, a stratified squamous epithelium. Here in the bottommost layer, the cells are largely cuboidal. They're larger, rounder, more or squarish cells. Cells in the stratum basale are undergoing constant mitosis. They're continually dividing and therefore pushing new cells constantly up into higher and higher layers through that continuous division. Because the epidermis is in constant contact with the environment, cells are wearing out regularly, and therefore you need continuous division of cells here to replace old cells as they wear out. So the stratum basale is where we generate new cells from. Most of the cells in this layer are going to be what we call keratinocytes, which are standard skin cells. Some of them are melanocytes. Melanocytes are pigment-producing cells, which produce melanin, which is the main pigment in skin. We'll talk more about skin pigments a little bit further down the line from now. Now, for the most part, the nerve endings in skin are down in the dermis, not in the epidermis. But you do have a couple of sensory receptors in the stratum basale. Those sensory receptors are called tactile cells or tactile discs. They are going to basically consist of a nerve fiber bundled up with a little bit of connective tissue to form what is called a tactile disc or a Merkel disc. If you call it a Merkel disc, capitalize the M in Merkel. It's named after the German scientist who first described them. Now, this is the thing you're going to see a lot in anatomy, and I want you to get used to this, that is a very, very common practice, or there was a very common practice in anatomy and physiology and in medicine in general, of naming things after people. And so you're very often going to encounter body parts or structures or cells or diseases or processes named after somebody who first described them or who first discovered them or whatever. That is a very, very common thing in anatomy. And so the tactile disc, the word tactile means sensitive to touch. So that name tells you what it does. The name Merkel disc, which is a so-called eponymous name, all that tells you is that it was named after somebody named Merkel. Well, as much as I'm a historian and a history buff, which you've all gathered by now, who you've had me for class before, I think it's very important to acknowledge the history of our field and the people who made important accomplishments in it. But for all of that, I am not a big fan of naming things in human bodies after people. And increasingly, the trend in the medical and anatomical sciences has been to not name things after people, to do away with the old practice of so-called eponymous naming, which is naming things after people in the human body. And there are two reasons for that. And they're both very good reasons for different reasons. One is because naming things in a way that describes what they do or where they are in the body is simply more helpful. When I call it a Merkel disc, all you know about it is that it's named after a dude named Merkel. That doesn't tell you anything about where it's located. That doesn't tell you anything about its function. That doesn't describe it in any way. Calling it a tactile disc tells you something about it because the word tactile means having to do with touch. So if you know the word tactile, that tells you, oh yeah, this is something that is a receptor for the touch sorts of senses. That it's a receptor for textures and a receptor for pressure. It allows sensory data to be coming in. So that name tactile disc is a more useful name. So increasingly in medical and anatomical sciences, we're trying to rename things that were originally named after people, mostly in the 1800s and 1900s, and give them more useful names that actually say something about where they are located in the body or what function they're performing that are more helpful to us medically and scientifically in describing. The other reason that we're trying to rename stuff is frankly kind of decolonizing medicine a little bit. That nearly all of these names are honoring a bunch of, frankly, old white dudes, in the 19th and 20th centuries, mostly a bunch of white European dudes who were claiming credit for discovering things in the human body that literally every human being who has ever lived, no matter where they are, has always had in their bodies for the 300,000 years that Homo sapiens has been a species. And then for every last human being, male or female, or otherwise, regardless of what ethnic origin they come from, to have a body bit named after some, white dude from France or Germany or whatever seems a little, eh, you know, little ethnocentrist, if, as it were, and so rather than just having all of us walking around with a body chunk named after, a German doctor or a French, biologist or whatever, we're increasingly trying to just give them more universal sorts of names, because that also especially acknowledges the fact that many of these parts were also independently discovered by more than one scientist. Many of them were discovered by lots of people working in lots of areas. Many of them were discovered more than once by different scientists in different parts of the world. Many of them were discovered independently by scholars in, for example, China, or scholars in the Middle East, or scholars in Africa. Some of them were independently discovered by women scholars. Some of them were independently discovered by Jewish scholars. And frankly, the field of medicine decided, oh, none of those people matter. Only a bunch of white dudes in Europe matter. And that's not really reasonable. So rather than just give only a tiny fraction of the people who are making important contributions to medical science credit, let's just give it a universal name that is going to help everybody understand what the part is. So I'm telling you both names for the simple reason that these parts and cells and things are known by all these names in medicine. And you're also going to find, this is also a useful thing to know, that many, many, many parts of the human body have multiple valid names. And that's not just from eponymous naming. Many parts of the body have multiple valid names because there's more than one legitimate way to describe a body parts in many cases, or because a body part was discovered by multiple different people and they gave it different names and they published things using those different names, and therefore those names both came into common usages in different parts of medicine at the same time. And as a result, lots and lots of people use different names for the same part for many, many years, and they kind of both sort of fell into common currency. Or because the language of medicine is complex language, and depending on how you're describing a body part, there could reasonably be more than one legitimate piece of terminology you could use for naming the same part of the body. So, for that reason, unfortunately, for you learning this subject, sometimes you have to learn more than one name for a body part, just because there's more than one common name that is used for the same body part or that is used for the same process. Sometimes that's because of eponymous naming. Sometimes that's just because of duplication in naming practices. Sometimes that's just because the complex language of anatomy and medicine lends itself to there being multiple accurate ways of naming or describing a thing. And so unfortunately, you do have to get accustomed to that. And when it comes to eponymous naming, many of the older names, like Merkel discs, have been in use for a very long time. And the trend of renaming them is fairly recent, within the last decade or so, or the last 15 years or so. And therefore, those of you going into medical and scientific fields are going to be dealing with older physicians and older scientists who are accustomed to the older name and might be much more used to calling the thing a Merkel disc than calling it a tactile disc. And therefore, you have to be used to the fact that there's more than one name in usage. And does that make your life more complicated? Yeah, unfortunately it does. But that's just how things are when a field is in transition. And science as a discipline and medicine as a discipline, and you have to get used to this too, are always in transition because we are always learning new things. We are always learning how to make these fields better. And as we learn new things, and as we learn ways to make things better, and as we streamline and try to make things more efficient and more effective and more useful for everybody, that does mean that sometimes older terminology that we are accustomed to knowing does change. But when you're living in a period of transition, that does put you in the position of having to know sometimes both ways of doing things, the old way and the new way, simultaneously, because there are people who were trained the old way and there are people who are trained the new way, and they're working side by side. And you're living in one of those transitional times. And spoiler alert, every time is one of those transitional times. There will never not be a transitional time. So if you write down on a test for me that that little receptor found in the stratum basale is a Merkel disc, I will not mark it wrong. If you call it a tactile disc, I will also not mark it wrong. They're both names that are still used in medicine and science. They are both still valid terms for the same structure. My preference is you call it a tactile disc because that is the more modern usage. That is the more conventional usage in current practice. And it's reflecting the trends of how we are trying to name things and do things in medicine and anatomy today. If you call it a Merkel disc, again, you're not wrong, but that's a little bit more old-fashioned usage. So this has all been a long way of explaining how we name stuff a little bit and why you're going to get more than one name for the same thing sometimes in here. Okay. Pivoting back. So that's the stratum basale. It's going to be a single layer of cells, more cuboidal than squamous, constantly dividing, mostly keratinocytes, standard skin cells, some melanocytes, pigment-producing cells, and a couple of tactile or Merkel discs for sensory reception. Not a lot, but a few. Now, let's move a little higher. Next layer up, this darker, thicker pigmented layer above that dark line, is the stratum spinosum. The stratum spinosum consists of 5 to 10 layers of cells. Now, as cells move further from the stratum basale, as cells divide and they work their way higher and higher up in the epidermis, they begin to change shape. They become less rounded or squarish, and they begin to flatten out. They gradually become more squamous. And in this layer, they begin developing spiky projections called desmosomes that bind them to other cells around them. Hence why we call this the stratum spinosum, because this layer is full of cells that look spiny. Stratum, the word stratum means layer. So stratum spinosum is the spiny layer. So this layer features mostly keratinocytes with spiny desmosomes on them, binding them to other cells around them. You will find a few melanocytes in this layer, but not many. Another type of cell you will find some of in this layer are cells called dendritic cells. Dendritic cells are also known by an alternate eponymous name. They are sometimes called Langerhans cells. Capitalize that if you call them that. They're named after the German physiologist Paul Langerhans, who first described them. Langerhans or dendritic cells are a type of macrophage. And macrophages, hopefully you remember, are immune cells. They're cells that gobble up pathogens. So the stratum spinosum is patrolled by dendritic cells that move through it and look for bacteria and other pathogens that have managed to penetrate down into the epidermis. So that's mostly what you get in this layer. Now, gradually, as you work your way up through the stratum spinosum, the cells get smaller and smaller and smaller and flatter as they are getting further and further away from the blood supply that comes in through the dermis. The higher up you go, the less nutrients they get, the less oxygen supply they get. Now, our next layer up is the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum consists of 2 to 5 layers of relatively flat cells. Now, the cells in this layer do not have the spiky desmosomes on them, and as a result, they have more space between them. They don't stick together as well, starting to spread out more. Furthermore, and this is where things get interesting, the cells in this layer, we call it the stratum granulosum, the grainy layer, because the cells in this layer of the skin, if you look at them under the microscope, look very grainy and spotty. They've begun to develop what are called keratohyalin granules. Grains of keratin have begun to appear within them. They release a waterproofing coating onto the outside surface of the cell. From this layer on up, the epidermis consists of cells with a waterproofing coating on the outside of the cell. And from this layer on up, the epidermis is therefore waterproofed, therefore keeping fluids of the body out and keeping fluids of the outside world out and keeping the fluids of the body in. Those little tiny keratohyalin granules within the cells are going to eventually form the keratin within them. Now, here's the thing. Once you waterproof the outside of the cell, though, once that coating forms on the outside, those cells can no longer take in water or water-soluble nutrients and gases. So once that coating covers the outside of the cell, they can't take in nutrients anymore, they can't take in oxygen anymore. Starting from the stratum granulosum on up, all of these cells are dead because they've lost the ability to take in nutrients and gases. Now, you see in our diagram here, the next layer up is a thin white line. That is the stratum lucidum. The word lucid means clear. So the stratum lucidum is the clear layer. It is not present in all skin. Not all skin has a stratum lucidum. You will only find the stratum lucidum in thick skin. We call it the stratum lucidum, or the clear layer, because if you tease it out from the other layers of skin in careful microscopic dissection, it will appear to be translucent. Light will pass through it. It's a very, very thin layer in which the cells are packed with a transparent, partially formed type of keratin called eliodin. So this is only present in thick skin. 2 to 5 layers thick here, very thin layer. And then we get to the uppermost layer of your skin, the part of your skin that you see, the stratum corneum, also called the horny layer. Not that kind of horny. This is horny as in the same kind of material found in horn, like the horns of cattle. Because the cells here in the uppermost layer of skin, this is the thickest layer of the epidermis on most parts of your body. It is between 15 and 20 cell layers thick. And in some parts of the body, like say the bottoms of your feet, it may be as thick as 30 layers of cells. Now, the stratum corneum consists of specialized cells called corneocytes. Corneocytes are keratinocytes that are fully packed with dense keratin, making them thick, water-resistant, much like an animal's horn, hence like the term horny layer. In fact, corneocytes, densely packed and formed into thick fibers, are exactly the substance that you find in the horns of cattle. They're exactly the substance that you find in the hooves of animals that have hooves. They're exactly the substance that you find in antlers, hence why we call this the horny layer. It's just that in your skin, they're not arranged into thick, dense fibers. It's more loosely arranged into widespread soft skin cells. They're packed with soft keratin rather than hard keratin, as we put it. Those cells gradually work their way through the multiple layers, getting slowly but surely pushed up to the exposed surface. Eventually, they find their way to the outer surface of the skin, and then eventually they will flake off or desquamate, otherwise known as exfoliating. The whole process, from the time it begins, from the time a skin cell originates in the stratum basale, a keratinocyte, I should say, till the time that it desquamates from the outer surface of the stratum corneum, for an average skin cell, takes about 40 days. Skin actually divides faster at night. There's more division in the skin cell layers at night than there is during the day. And you get more division in any part of the skin that experiences more mechanical stress. Any part of the skin that experiences more frequent abrasion, any part of the skin that's stretched out more frequently, you will get more rubbing on it. Those parts of the skin will experience faster division, and the skin will get thicker. You'll have more layers of cells in the stratum corneum. If there's a region of skin that's getting rubbed very frequently by outside forces, the stratum corneum can actually build up in those areas to as thick as 50 layers of cells. You can build up a thickened, hardened, insensitive patch of skin in those areas that we call a callus. That's what a callus is. It's a thickened region of the stratum corneum. Everybody gets calluses to a certain extent. We all get them on the bottoms of our feet, for example. The thickened tissue on the bottom of your heel, for example, is a callus. And depending on what sort of activities you engage in your life, you might get calluses on other parts of your skin as well. People who do particular kinds of work very often develop calluses. People who work with their hands a lot will often get calluses on their hands based on the kind of labor they do. I have a little callus right here on the inside of my middle finger on my right hand. There's a name for that kind of callus. It's called a scribe's callus. It is the callus that often develops when somebody holds a pen or a marker a lot, right there on the spot where you rest the pen against your finger. And if you write all the time and you're holding a pen a lot, like I hold my dry erase marker on the blackboard, or I hold a pen that I'm writing with all the time, you get that callus right on the inside of your fingertip right there. When I was doing field work and I was doing archaeology in the field all the time, I got real thick calluses on my hands from holding the shovel all the time. And if you do gardening a lot, probably going to do the same thing. Okay, so that is a look at the epidermis, folks. Now, let's go deeper. Let's go down into the layers beneath the epidermis. Down deep to the epidermis, we find the dermis. The epidermis is only the very surface of the skin. The thickest region of the skin is the dermis. The dermis is going to have two distinct layers. And the dermis is a connective tissue layer. The upper region of the dermis, the top 20% or so of the dermis, and this diagram doesn't divide it up, but the top 20% or so of the dermis is called the papillary layer. The word papillary means nipple-like layer or containing nipples. It doesn't literally have nipples, but take a look at it. Look at the boundary between the dermis and the epidermis. You can see you've got all these nipple-like projections of dermis that poke up into the epidermis. It's not a nice, neat, straight line boundary. It's a wavy boundary. The dermis is folded up into the epidermis. And that's on purpose, because that basically folds the dermis into the epidermis to help lock the epidermis in place. Remember that part of the job of the underlying connective tissue is to bind the epithelial tissue on top of it to the underlying tissue. That's the job. So, by folding the epidermis into the dermis, by not just having a nice straight line where it's just sitting on top of it, like a page of a book sitting on top of another page of a book, by having that wavy boundary, that locks the epidermis into the underlying connective tissue and therefore holds it in place. Those little portions of the dermis that stick up into the epidermis are called dermal papillae. And whenever something is a papilla, that's a term you're going to hear a lot in anatomy, anything that is a papilla is a nipple-shaped structure. The word papilla is Greek for nipple. So anything that is a sort of nipple-shaped structure is a papilla. The dermal papillae not only serve to fold the bottom of the epidermis into the dermis, but they also serve to elevate sensory receptors that are found in the dermis and bring them closer to the skin's surface. So the dermal papillae, the little projections of dermis here, often contain nerve endings and sensory receptors to increase the sensitivity of the skin. Now, the tissue of the dermis is not all uniform. The papillary layer, the upper 20% of the dermis, where the dermal papillae are found, is largely areolar connective tissue. And if you remember our discussion of different tissue types that we had before, areolar connective tissue, you might recall, connective tissue proper, is the connective tissue that we find immediately underneath most epithelial tissues. So it's not at all surprising that what you find right here is areolar connective tissue. It binds the epidermis in place. It contains lots of nerve endings to provide sensation to the skin. It contains a very rich blood supply, lots of blood vessels in here, because it's bringing in all of the nutrients and all of the gas exchange for the epidermis on top of it. It's supplying all of the oxygen, taking away the carbon dioxide from the epidermis. It's bringing in all the nutrients for the epidermis. It's taking away all the chemical wastes from the epidermis. Also, the papillary layer is full of white blood cells. Remember when we talked about areolar connective tissue, we mentioned all the different kinds of immune cells that are found within it, all the things like macrophages and leukocytes and so forth. Lots and lots of those in the papillary layer of the dermis in order to defend against any pathogens that manage to get through the epidermis. If the epidermis gets broken, bacteria and other pathogens that get through will immediately go into the papillary layer of the dermis, and then they will encounter, first and foremost, any white blood cells and other defensive cells that are waiting in the dermis. And so that's our body's second line of defense if the epidermis gets broken. So that's that papillary layer. Now let's go down deeper. Beneath that papillary layer, we get down here into the deeper region of the dermis. Down here in the deeper region of the dermis, we find this is the bottom 80% or so of the dermis, which is called the reticular layer. Now, the reticular layer of the dermis is mostly going to consist of protein fibers. Lots of collagen down here. Lots of, as you might have guessed from its name, reticular fibers down here. This is going to be mostly a dense, irregular connective tissue. And if you recall from our discussion of different tissue types, dense, irregular connective tissue is highly resistant to being stretched or torn. And therefore, it is going to give the skin most of its resilience against being abnormally stretched out and against being ripped and torn. I mean, obviously, you still can stretch and rip and tear your skin, but it doesn't stretch too far. You can't stretch your skin infinitely, and you can't tear it easily, you know. I mean, it might seem to you like we can tear our skin easily, but for everyday wear and tear purposes, the skin is pretty resilient. Within the reticular layer, we also find the origins of sweat glands, oil glands, hair follicles, all of those other things that are housed within the skin, the various glands and ducts and so forth, originate deep down in the reticular layer. Now, one thing the reticular layer does not have as much of, the reticular layer has less blood supply. You find a lot more of the blood vessels in the areolar tissue up in the papillary layer. The connective tissue in the reticular layer has relatively little blood supply. If it does get torn, if the collagen bundles down here in the reticular layer do get torn, they don't heal very well. They get damaged easily. Well, no, they don't get damaged easily, but if they do get damaged, it is difficult for the body to repair that damage. That will cause large visible keloid scars to appear on the surface of the skin. When you get scars on your skin, that usually means you've suffered damage that went all the way down to the reticular layer. And the visible scarification you see is in the reticular layer. The papillary layer heals very easily. It's got a very rich blood supply. The epidermis, constant cell division, that heals very easily too. Damage to those upper layers of the skin heals very, very easily. But damage to the reticular layer does not heal well at all. Dense, irregular connective tissue has very, very poor healing. You damage those collagen bundles, it's going to create visible, bulgy scars on the skin's surface that we often call keloids. Now, if those collagen bundles are damaged by being stretched out and torn rather than by external injury, it can create visible, bulgy marks on the surface of the skin that we call striae. And those striae are what we often refer to as stretch marks. They gradually fade over time, but they almost never ever fully heal. Now, the bottommost layer of the integuments, beneath the dermis, is the hypodermis, sometimes called the subcutaneous tissue or subcutaneous fat. And we call it that because it's mostly adipose tissue. That is fatty tissue. Some amount of areolar connective tissue down there, but mostly it's adipose tissue. The subcutaneous tissue, or hypodermis, lies between the dermis and the underlying muscular tissue. Thickness varies depending on where in the body you are. Some parts of the body have very little hypodermis. Some parts of the body have a very thick hypodermis. Most parts of you are going to have some amount of hypodermis for thermal insulation, because that subcutaneous fat is basically like an insulating blanket, helping your body to retain heat. In general, subcutaneous fat is thicker in female-bodied individuals than in male-bodied individuals. Biologically female individuals have higher percentage of estrogen than biologically male individuals. And yes, everybody has some amount of estrogen. But one of the effects of heightened estrogen is that it causes the body to retain a higher level of subcutaneous fats. And therefore, as a result of higher subcutaneous fats, you will that have sort of smoother looking body features. It will cause the angles of muscle and bone to appear less harsh, cause body features to look more rounded and smooth, which is why, broadly speaking, people who are biologically female will have more rounded, more smooth looking body features because of the thicker layer of subcutaneous fats. Obviously, individual biology will vary. No two people have exactly the same body fat percentages. Genetic factors are a big factor in that. Individual exercise regimens are a big factor in that. Diet is a big factor in that. There's no universality in this, but it's a generalization that all other things being equal, individuals with higher estrogen levels will retain higher amounts of subcutaneous fat. Children also retain higher levels of subcutaneous fat. This is a defense against the fact that their smaller bodies lose heat more easily. So prior to puberty, your body will keep a higher level of subcutaneous fat, called the baby fat, right? You've all heard that term. Because when you have a smaller body, you simply lose heat more readily. So keeping a thicker layer of subcutaneous fat is a defense against that. We call it brown fats a lot of times in kids because that is a very rich blood supply, and that gives it a brownish color as opposed to the yellow color we tend to associate with adult fat. All right, so that is the integument. Now I'm going to tell you all a little creepy story about the integument here. I'm a forensic anthropologist by training, and I had some time where I worked in forensics and I worked with cadavers and I worked on crime scenes and so forth. And you learn a lot of interesting things doing that. And you also hear a lot of folklore and mythology about dead bodies and things that happen to them. And all of you, I am sure, at some point in your life have heard the myth that your hair and your nails keep growing after you die. It's not true, but here's what's actually happening. What's actually happening is after you die is a thing called skin slippage. See, because after you die, what happens is the epidermis and dermis, they're folded together, like you can see in my diagram right there. But following death, that begins to relax. The connection between the epidermis and the dermis begins to relax. Those dermal papillae begin to smooth out. And as a result, the epidermis begins to kind of slide over the top of the dermis. It begins to slip away from the dermis. And as the body begins to decay, the epidermis begins to contract. One of the consequences of this is that as the epidermis begins to contract as the body decays, portions of the nail and portions of the hair that were previously underneath the skin are now exposed to the surface. This gives the appearance that the nails have gotten longer and that the hairs have gotten longer. They have not actually gotten longer. It just makes it look like they've gotten longer from the perspective of the living because parts of them that were under the skin while you were alive are no longer under the skin because the epidermis has slipped back. So the phenomenon of skin slippage post-mortem has created that illusion that hair and nails keep growing after they die. All right? Okay. So that is our integument, folks. That is the stuff that is going on with the layers of the skin itself. Now, skin is more than just its layers, however. There's some other stuff happening there that we need to talk about. How about skin color? Let's talk about skin pigmentation for a moment. This is obviously a thing that our culture has an outsized interest in for reasons that are quite frankly generally not good. We as a society have decided that skin color means way, way more than it actually biologically ought to mean. We have decided that skin color is an identifier that tells you things about somebody's biology, about their capabilities, about their nature, about their origins, and so forth, that quite frankly, skin color does not tell you. And I'm putting that out there. Skin color does not tell you much of anything about anything else about you. Skin color can tell you some clues about ethnicity, but even those can be extremely extremely misleading. Because I am here to tell you that not any skin color that you see in any human being is unique to any one ethnic origin or culture anywhere on Earth. Race, this concept of race that we have in biology. Race is a myth, folks. Race does not exist at a biological level. At a bio level, there is no such thing as race. Straight up. There is no biological genetic way of sorting human beings into nice, neat little box categories. There is no clean genetic line that says, okay, humans fall into the following nice, neat little biological groups that have nice, neat characteristics that say, okay, there are these kinds of humans with these kind of characteristics that do these kind of things. That is not a thing. Humans are not that easily subdividable. They straight up are not. We as a species are quite frankly too variable and have too much genetic admixture between different human groups for us to have nice, neat, clean racial lines that are easily sorted. Now, you might say, okay, this seems pretty obvious. There are black people and there are white people and there are Asian people and so forth, except those lines aren't clear cut and clean either. Here in the United States, we divide them along cultural lines. But you go to other places and you will find it's not quite that simple. That if you are from, say, Asia, you will find that people who are native to, East Asia do not consider Chinese folks and Japanese folks and Vietnamese folks and Korean folks to all be one race. If you go to Africa, you will find that folks who are native to Africa do not consider everybody native to Africa to be one race. Under the apartheid regime in South Africa that existed for many, many, many years, there was not considered to be legally two races, black and white. There were considered to be legally three races, black, white, and Zulu, because people of the Zulu tribe were considered to be a completely different race than other black Africans. At least from the perspective of Americans, they would have all been considered quote-unquote black people. But according to that cultural regimen, no, they were not considered all the same race. Thing we call race is a cultural, not a biological identifier. Does it exist at a cultural level, at a sociological level? 100%. Yes. Talk about it in a sociology class. Talk about it in an anthropology class. As an ethnic and social structure, race is obviously very real and obviously one that we as a culture have a very hard time reckoning with. And have for quite some time. And I would say we, as a culture, we put an outsized importance on it too. Yes, but at a biological level, it is not real. And trying to sort people into groups on the basis of skin color is going to be very, very misleading, extremely misleading, because you can get very pale people and very dark people in any region. And you can get very pale Africans and you can get very dark Africans. You can get pale Europeans and dark Europeans. And just 100 years ago in the United States, people who were Italian were not considered white. And if I brought in a person from the Aboriginal interior of Africa, you would probably consider them to be black, but they have no ties to Africa and have not for 50,000 years. So skin color is not a clear identifier. I love to use myself as an example here. You're probably looking at me right now and thinking, okay, he's a white guy. I am just very, very pale as my people go. But let's talk about pigmentation. What is skin pigment? Human skin tones come largely from three pigments. There are three different pigments that give coloration to human skin. We all have them to some extent. First off, hemoglobin. The hemoglobin in your blood provides some base pigmentation to everybody. It provides a pinkish tone to human skin. What we think of as quote unquote white skin in most people is mostly the pinkish color of hemoglobin, the baseline color of the red pigment in your blood coming through your epidermis. In places with thinner skin and more blood vessels closer to the skin surface, the coloration of hemoglobin is more apparent. And that will cause certain areas of the skin to be redder in color. The lips, the nipples, certain parts of the genitalia are the most obvious examples. Now, the most prominent pigment in human skin is a pigment called melanin. Melanin is produced by the cells called melanocytes that I mentioned earlier. It might surprise you to learn that pretty much all people, regardless of their ethnic heritage, have pretty much the same number of melanocytes. What differs from one individual to another is how active those melanocytes are, that is, how much melanin they are making, and what combination of specific melanin pigments they are making, because there are a couple of different melanin pigments that they can produce. And depending on how active they are and what combination of pigments they are making, melanocytes can produce brownish, black, tan, yellowish, and reddish skin tones. Melanocytes are primarily stimulated by ultraviolet radiation exposure. We get UV radiation from the sun. Everybody has an upward and bottom level genetic range in which their body will make melanin. In other words, within the limits of your genetics, there's a minimum amount of melanin your body will make at any given time, that it will never make less than that. And there's a maximum amount of melanin your body is capable of making based on how much solar radiation you are exposed to. You get more sun, your body will say, I'd better make more melanin, because the purpose of melanin, folks, is radiation shielding. When your body is exposed to more UV rays, your skin says, I need to make more melanin, because melanin soaks up UV radiation to help protect the body from exposure to it. That's the job of melanin. That's why when you go out in the sun, you get a tan. At least a certain amount of getting a tan, up to the upward limits of your genetic range of radiation production. Like I said, everybody has an upward limit of how much melanin their skin is capable of making. You will generally find that this is where your ethnicity does matter. People who have ancestors from closer to the equator, their bodies will make larger amounts of melanin. People whose ancestors are from further north, their bodies will make less melanin. Why? Because when you're closer to the equator, you get more intense sunlight, you get more intense radiation exposure, and as a result, you need more radiation shielding. So, more sunlight, more, and your ancestors evolved to produce greater amounts of melanin. By contrast, when you are further north, less UV radiation, your body actually wants to soak up more. Why? To make vitamin D. Because another one of the functions of skin, which we're going to talk about shortly, is vitamin D production, and it needs enough UV radiation stimulus to do that. And if you're not getting enough of that, you won't make adequate vitamin D. So when you're further north and the sunlight is less intense, you want to be paler. So people whose ancestors are from further north tend to be paler and tend to therefore make less melanin so that they can get sufficient UV radiation exposure. So the quantity of melanin you produce and therefore how dark your skin tone is and how dark it can get when you're out in the sun varies depending on heredity. It will vary depending on how much sun exposure you have had. It will vary depending on your diet. If you are well nourished, generally speaking, your skin will be darker complected because your body can spare the resources to make UV. It's to make pigments. When your body is not well nourished, it simply doesn't have the energy to spare for melanin production, and therefore you will tend to be paler. Certain regions of the body have higher concentration of melanin than others. The nipples, the genitalia, the region around the anus, and the dorsal surfaces of the hands and feet, generally speaking, have higher concentrations of melanin. If melanin clumps together in your skin, that can cause freckles. If you have a mole or birthmark, that is an area where melanin will often be clumped together as well. And therefore, you will end up with lots of melanin and therefore a darker spot. Finally, the last bit of pigmentation comes from a pigment called keratin. And note that is keratin, not keratin. Keratin, the protein found in human skin, is spelled with a K, Keratin. Keratin, the pigment, is Carotene. Keratin produces a yellowish tone in skin. You see it most often in thicker skin. It's very visible if you have like corns on your feet, for example. You can see it in like the calluses in skin a lot, will cause a yellowish cast to them. It's a minor contributor to human skin pigmentation in most cases. Now, these are normal pigments. These are standard pigments. You can end up with abnormal skin tones from a lot of sources. And abnormalities in skin coloration can tell you a lot of things about your health and well-being. In fact, knowing something about abnormalities of skin coloration is quite important for knowing about overall health. And for those of us going into the medical fields, we need to talk about some abnormalities in skin coloration. Some things you might observe in somebody. If you have an abnormal bluish cast to your skin, that is called cyanosis. Prefix cyan means blue. Cyanosis is indicative of hypoxia, that is inadequate oxygenation. If somebody's got a bluish cast to their skin, that's bad. It's very bad. So you want to be very watchful of that one. There is a rare skin disorder, very, 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 very rare, like as in like only a few hundred people in the entire world have it, called methemoglobinemia. I don't even have it listed in the handout, that causes people to have blue skin, like basically all the time. That's not the same thing as cyanosis, but again, it's extraordinarily rare. Cyanosis, but normally if somebody's got a bluish cast to their skin, that indicates that they're not getting adequate oxygenation, and that's usually a very bad sign that something is acutely wrong and they need some help. All right, other end of the spectrum, erythema. Prefix eryth, E-R-Y-T-H, means red. Erythema is abnormal redness to the skin. A lot of things can cause erythema. Usually they are temporary conditions. Heat, exerting yourself after exercise or whatever. Sunburn can lead to erythema. Emotional responses often leads to erythema. When somebody is angry, when somebody is embarrassed, when somebody is sexually aroused. Anything that elevates body temperature can lead to erythema. Speaking of emotional responses, pallor. Pallor. That is an ashen or pale color to the skin. People can get pale in the face from emotional stress when they are frightened, when they are anxious. Usually fear is indicative of pallor. When they are in shock, when somebody goes into shock, pallor is often indicator. When they have low blood pressure, pallor is indicated. When they are anemic, um, pallor is often results. When they are seriously cold, pallor can result. Pallor is not the same thing as albinism. Albinism is a hereditary condition in which you lack melanin. It's a recessive genetic disorder in which your body does not make melanin. And therefore you just have abnormally pale skin all the time. Your body is just pale all over. Skin is literally white. You are going to often at the same time have insufficient pigmentation in your hair and eyes. Your hair is usually very, 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 very pale blonde or white. Your eyes are often very, very, very pale blue or kind of a pinkish color. Folks with albinism are going to be very sensitive to the sun. They'll sunburn even in relatively normal sunlight conditions. Their eyes will be very sensitive to bright light. They'll often wear sunglasses even on normal days. So that's a hereditary condition. The condition of vitiligo, Vitiligo, is a hereditary condition, or actually a hereditary condition. We don't know why vitiligo happens, in which the body begins to lose pigment later in life. We do not know why vitiligo happens, but it will result in the appearance of pale, unpigmented spots randomly on the skin that will gradually spread and become more and more prominent. It's most visible in people who are already dark complected, where they just basically begin developing basically white spots on their skin, which gradually spread and become more and more and more prominent until eventually they lose pigmentation altogether. We have no idea why vitiligo happens. It can happen to anybody, but it's, again, most readily visible in people of dark-skinned ethnicities. Most famously, the singer Michael Jackson had vitiligo, and a lot of people sadly accused him of getting his skin bleached or something because they said, oh, he clearly wants to look more like a white guy. No, he just had vitiligo and he lost his pigmentation. Other things that can happen, you have jaundice. Jaundice is an abnormal yellowing of the skin and the whites of the eyes due to excess bilirubin. Bilirubin is the accumulation of pigment in the blood from the breakdown of red blood cells. Normally, the liver filters bilirubin out of the blood. So if somebody's jaundiced, that usually indicates liver dysfunction. Now, jaundice is very common in newborn babies whose livers have not yet basically begun filtering bilirubin, that the mom's body does that before birth. But in a newborn, it might not yet have happened, especially in premature births. Babies that are premature often are jaundiced for the first few days of life. There are treatments that can be done to help with that. But in an adult, jaundice usually indicates liver dysfunction or liver failure. It's often associated with things like cirrhosis of the liver or severe hepatitis. A condition called bronzing. Bronzing is an abnormally dark, patchy tan. It's not associated with sun exposure. It's associated with overstimulation of melanocytes. Also often includes appearance of black freckles on the face or the shoulders. This is characteristic of a hormonal disorder called Addison's disease that we're going to talk about later on this semester. And last but not least, hematomas. Whenever you have a hematoma, that's a bruise. That's the formal term for a bruise. It's a purplish or yellowish mark on the skin due to subcutaneous bleeding and the formation of subcutaneous blood clots. They often appear darkish, purplish, or blackish at first, and then turn a yellowish color as they gradually heal and the body reabsorbs the broken red blood cells. Now, those are some abnormal pathologic skin markings. skin colors. Let's talk about some skin markings that are not pathological, that are just some things that can happen to anybody. Freckles, I mentioned freckles before. Those are patches of clumped melanocytes. Tendency to have them is often hereditary. They tend to become more prominent with more sun exposure. Many of you probably have one or more moles somewhere on your body. A mole is a raised patch of highly clumped melanocytes, leading to a raised, darkened area of skin. Often they form around a hair follicle. So a lot of times a mole will have hair growing out of it. You can have a hemangioma. A hemangioma is a birthmark. Birthmarks are technically benign skin tumors, folks. They come in two forms. There's what's called a capillary birthmark. Those are often bright red in color. They're what we call strawberry birthmarks. They're most common in young children, and they often disappear within a few years. A more brownish colored birthmark, brownish or brownish red birthmark, is a cavernous birthmark. The old days, they used to call them port wine stains because it looked like somebody had spilled some wine on your skin. Those are usually permanent. They will usually last throughout your life. And both moles and hemangiomas, if you have one, keep an eye on it. If it ever changes color, if it ever changes texture, if it ever begins to grow or spread in any significant way, that is an indicator, often an early warning sign of skin cancer. So if you have a mole or a birthmark, keep an eye on it. If it's in a part of your body that's hard for you to keep an eye on, get somebody you trust who knows you to keep an eye on it for you, or get your doctor to keep an eye on it for you. And if you ever notice a change in it, get it checked right away. Other markings we all have. We all have lines in our skin. Those are flexion creases. Those are the lines that form in the places where your joints bend. You all have them in your hands, your wrists, your knees, your feet, and your elbows, any place where a joint consistently bends. And you all also have friction ridges. Friction ridges are better known as fingerprints and handprints. Those are the little tiny lines that exist all over your hands, your fingertips, your tips of your toes, and the bottoms of your feet that are there to improve your grip. They create friction when you grab hold of things. They are unique to primates. No other animals have them. Okay, that's not entirely true. There are one or two other kinds of animals that do, but basically their job is to create friction when you grab things, make you grip onto things more tightly. Now, there is a common cultural myth that fingerprints and so forth are unique to you. They are highly individualized, but they are not 100% unique to you. And I'm here to tell you as a forensic professional that fingerprint reading as an indicator of identity on crime scenes is frankly kind of a pseudoscience. The fact that police departments still rely on it to the extent that they do bothers me a lot because it's not 100% accurate. It is full of errors. It is difficult to interpret. Very few people are qualified to interpret it well. Even computer models often get it wrong. And there are plenty of people out there who have fingerprints that are basically a match for each other. So it's not a thing that can be readily relied upon. Your fingerprints are highly individual, but they are not unique to you. Oh, and a fun fact about them, they are not genetically encoded. So identical twins will have different fingerprints. They're a result of fluid forces acting on the skin during uterine development. And if they get damaged, they will grow back the same way. So if you like burn your fingertips or whatever, they will grow back exactly the same way they were before. And also just gotta say it, you cannot read your future in your fingerprints and your flexion creases and your friction ridges. Not a thing. All right. Now, last but not least, before we leave the integument behind, let's talk a little bit about the things that it does. Functions of the integument, because it's got more functions than you might expect. Most obvious function of the integument is it is your body's first line barrier. It is protection against outside forces. It is a physical barrier against trauma and damage to any of the more sensitive tissues beneath it. It protects you against outside blows. It protects you against anything from outside the body getting in. It protects against external chemicals. It protects against external pathogens penetrating the body. It is the body's first and foremost line of defense. It guards against radiation, as we talked about before with UV rays and the ability of pigments to absorb them. It also protects the body from inside stuff getting out. It prevents water loss and the loss of the body's internal chemicals. And it guards against, pain and suffering from more delicate tissues coming into contact with a dangerous environment. Now, for all that it's a barrier, the skin does have a limited absorption function. It has a very tiny capacity for gas exchange. Believe it or not, you get 1 to 2% of your oxygen through your skin. It has a small amount of absorption capability. Fat-soluble materials can be absorbed through the skin. Technically, fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K can be absorbed through the skin. Fat-soluble drugs can be absorbed through the skin, which is why things like hydrocortisone cream can be absorbed through your skin. And unfortunately for us, fat-soluble toxins can be absorbed through the skin, like, for example, poison ivy toxin. We talked about vitamins that are fat-soluble a moment ago. Let's talk about vitamin D synthesis. In response to UV radiation exposure, your skin begins synthesizing vitamin D, which is an essential vitamin needed to help your body absorb calcium. The process of vitamin D synthesis actually begins in the kidneys and is completed in other organs of the body, but the process starts with the skin, and then the kidneys and the liver finish it. Sorry, I think I said that backwards. Yeah, the skin begins the process of vitamin D synthesis. It is completed by the kidneys and the liver, but the skin is necessary to begin the process. So you have to have adequate sun exposure to make sure that vitamin D is synthesized. And one of the reasons why many of us are vitamin D deficient is because we don't get our skin exposed to the sun enough, because many of us are largely indoor animals. And so make sure you're getting enough sun exposure. Get outside once in a while so that your skin is getting some exposure and you're getting adequate vitamin D. And if you're not, honestly, take a supplement of some kind. For those of you with darker pigmentation, honestly, living here in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm teaching this class here in Pennsylvania. If you are not getting adequate UV radiation exposure, and if you're a dark pigmented individual living in this latitude, a little bit harder. And the darker your skin is, the harder it is to get that. Getting vitamin D supplementation, not the worst idea. There's a reason we put vitamin D in our dairy products here in this culture, because living at this latitude where there's less sunlight, and in a culture where we cover most of our skin with clothing most of the time, and where we're mostly spending most of our time indoors, many of us are vitamin D deficient because we're not getting enough skin exposure to stimulate that vitamin D production. Other things the skin does. Skin is our body's biggest sensory organ. Down in mostly in the dermis, in the papillary layer of the dermis, but in the bottommost layer of the epidermis, we find sensory receptors that are sensitive to a wide variety of stimuli. Sensitive to heat, cold, touches, pressure, both light and heavy pressure, separate receptors for that. Stretching sensations, textures, edges of objects, vibrations, and pain. All of those are different kinds of receptors, folks. Different sensations, different senses, technically. In elementary school, they taught you about the sense of touch. It's actually like 9 or 10 different senses. And your skin has different receptors for all of them. Not all regions of the skin are equally sensitive. You have the most sensitivity in your fingertips, in your nipples, in your genitalia, palms of your hands. You have the least skin sensitivity on the calluses on the soles of your feet and the skin of your back. Other things the skin does, it is doing a lot of thermoregulation. The subcutaneous fat, as I indicated previously, provides thermal insulation, helping to regulate your body temperature and keep you from losing too much heat. Your body will control blood flow to the skin, increasing it to release more heat. That's why you get flushed whenever you're hot, or decreasing it to prevent you from losing heat. That's why you get pale when you get cold. Your body's withdrawing blood flow from the skin so you don't lose heat that way. And of course, you sweat through the skin as a way of helping to cool off. So your skin is a major thermoregulatory organ. And last but not least, our skin is a major communication organ. It has important social functions. Homo sapiens evolved as a social animal. We are evolved to live in groups. And our skin carries out a lot of social communication functions. Whenever you're a social animal, an important part of being a social animal is having adaptations to communicate things about your nature, your feelings, your health and well-being to your fellow animals. And among our other things, our skin communicates things such as features of your skin facilitate recognition. Let's be honest. Without skin, we wouldn't be able to recognize one another individually very well. Helps to know whose faces are whose. Muscles found in the skin control facial expression, helping to communicate our moods and feelings and opinions to one another. Color changes in skin, as we described a few minutes ago, can help tell us when somebody is unhealthy, can help tell when somebody is sick, can help tell when somebody is stressed, can help communicate things about somebody's emotional state, all things that are important to know when you live in social groupings with other animals. So you can see skin has a lot of functions beyond just barrier. It's an important organ doing a lot of things for us. All right, so moving beyond the integument, though, let's start taking a look at some of its derivative structures now. And let's begin with the hairs, which you have more than you probably think that you do. Hair is ubiquitous on the human body. Hairs are small filaments of keratinized cells. They grow from follicles, which are rooted down in the deep layers of the skin. The follicle originates at the base of the dermis, actually extending down into the hypodermis very slightly. And they're found everywhere on your body, with the exception of the lips, the nipples, portions of the genitals, and portions of the digits, the hands, and the feet. Otherwise, most every part of your body features hairs. It might surprise you to learn that the number and distribution of hairs actually does not differ much from one person to another and does not differ much between sexes. What does differ is the texture and pigmentation of hair. And in particular, you will find that levels of testosterone play a major role in hair texture and in hair coloration. Broadly speaking, higher testosterone levels will contribute to thickening and coarsening of hair and to darkening of the pigmentation of hair. That is, however, not a universal thing. And a thing we need to understand, we have this cultural idea, and this needs to be very much dispelled, that more hair, darker hair, and body hair is a male feature, and that less hair and smoother hair and lighter hair is a female feature. That is in no way universal. Humans are far too variable animals for that. We can make a good generalization, a broad general human rule that says, in general, higher testosterone levels are usually associated with people who are assigned male at birth, and that higher testosterone levels will, broadly speaking, cause hairs to become thicker, coarser, and darker in pigmentation on more of the body. That is broadly true. However, and if you haven't figured this out yet, it's an important rule to learn about human biology and about biology in general. Everything is a spectrum. Everything has shades of variation. Everything is going to vary across a range. There are plenty of assigned male at birth individuals who have less visible body hair. And I will not say less body hair because, again, the number and distribution of body hairs doesn't actually differ much from one person to another. What differs is the thickness and darkness and texture of those hairs. There are plenty of assigned male at birth individuals who, without any outside hormonal intervention of any kind whatsoever, will, just because of individual genetic variation, have less prominence and paler body hair. There are plenty of assigned female at birth individuals who, due to completely normal and natural genetic qualities, have more and darker body hair on greater percentages of their body, and that is completely normal and natural. And the extent that we get over ourselves as a society and stop thinking, okay, well, a woman with more body hair has got something weird going on. No, that's not the case. And a male with less body hair has got something weird going on. No, that's not the case at all. This is within the range of normal and natural human variation. The things that I say about, okay, in general, patterns are just that, generalizations. A good rule to remember about anything involving human health and human bodies that will serve you well in your medical careers is that all rules have exceptions, including this one. And just look at the generalization as just that, a generalization, and expect humans to exhibit variation. And do not be surprised by variation, and do not be worried about variation unless it is pathological. And unless it is showing signs of, okay, there's a problem here. And unless you're showing signs of, okay, something is going on that is deeply weird and concerning, unless you're showing signs of something that is excessive. And excessive does not mean, okay, a dude who has very little chest hair. Excessive does not mean a woman who's got some hairs between her breasts. Excessive does not mean a woman who's got some hair on her upper lip. Excessive does not mean a guy who never really got leg hair. Those are not really problems. If something is part of a constellation of larger issues, if you're seeing, somebody who's assigned female at birth who has a full beard, you might be wanting to look into whether there's a hormonal issue going on. If you're looking at somebody who was assigned male at birth who never got facial hair, you might wonder, okay, is there something hormonal going on? But they even then look and find out, okay, is there some other constellations of symptoms going on that is going to tell you more about what's happening? But okay, given those generalizations, let's take a look at hair and what hairs are all about. We will say that in general, across the boards, you can say that you can expect hair on all the parts of the body that I described for pretty much everybody. Broadly speaking, a human scalp has somewhere on the order of 200 to 250,000 hairs on it. Average male beard has somewhere around 30,000 hairs in it. So let's look at a hair. Pull up a screen share again. Like my previous one, this is out of your handout for today. Okay, this is a cross-sectional view of a human hair looking through the layers of skin so you can see the different parts of it and what is going on with them. Now, here is the shaft of the hair. The shaft is generally constructed as being any part of the hair that is visible above the surface of the skin and slightly below the skin surface, broadly speaking, any part of the hair that is down into the dermis is the shaft of the hair. Sorry, down into the epidermis is the shaft of the hair. Any part of the hair that is down inside the follicle is the roots of the hair. Now, looking at what we have going on here, for the parts that we have here, the follicle is going to be the sheath down within the skin that houses the hair. The follicle, you can see, is enlarged at its base to form what we call the bulb of the hair. In the bulb of the hair, here you're going to find the hair matrix, which is the living region of tissue from which the hair grows. Here's the papilla of the hair. At the base of the hair, you will find the papilla of the hair. That is where the nerve supply and the blood supply for the hair comes in. So that's where we're going to find a tiny little bit of living tissue there, a little where the blood supply that supplies nutrients to the growing hair. That's where the nerve ending of the hair is going to be. The hair matrix is the living cells that surround the base of the hair and the living cells from which it grows. That bulgy area is the hair bulb. The shaft of the hair grows up through the sheath of the follicle. You can see that associated with the hair follicle, we have a sebaceous gland, an oil gland, which releases oily secretions onto the shaft of the hair, keeping it lubricated so that it's not going to become dried and cracked. We are also going to find apocrine sweat glands, a specialized kind of sweat gland associated with some hair follicles, but not all, that will also release their secretions onto the shaft of the hair, where they'll be absorbed into the hair and then released onto the surface. I will tell you more about apocrine sweat glands in the near future here. Many hair follicles are also associated with a little tiny smooth muscle found here in the dermis of the skin called an erector pili muscle. The erector pili muscle is going to be attached to a bulge in the side of the hair follicle. The erector pili muscle is a smooth muscle, that is an unconscious muscle, that will pull on the shaft of the hair, causing the hair to stand erect when you are cold or when you are frightened. That is a reflex response, a vestigial reflex. And if you don't know the term vestige, a vestige is anything in the human body that is a leftover from an earlier stage of our evolution. And we have a lot of vestiges in our body, the human tailbone being a classic example of a vestige. But vestiges don't have to be objects. A vestige can be a process. A vestige can be a thing the body does. And the fact that your hairs stand on end when you are cold or when you are frightened is also a vestigial response in the body. And that vestigial response is a response to what happens when the body is cold or frightened, because what's going on with that vestigial response is you had, in the distant past, a fur-bearing ancestor. And furry animals, when they are cold, fluff up their fur to trap warm air close to the body to help retain heat. So, when you are cold, what does your body do? The erector pili muscles try to do that. They try to fluff up the fur that you don't have anymore, because even though evolution lost the fur a long time ago, the reflex action of making fur fluff up still exists. And therefore, the body tries to fluff the fur, and therefore your hairs stand on end. The vestigial reflex is still there. Likewise, what happens when you frighten a cat? Bottle brushes its tail, makes its hair stand on end, because furry animals will fluff up their fur when they are scared to try to make themselves look bigger and more threatening when confronted with a challenge. And obviously, we don't have the fur anymore, but that vestigial reflex still exists. So when you are frightened, your body tries to fluff up the fur that you don't have anymore, trying to make you look bigger and more threatening in the face of that threat. And so we fluff up that fur that we don't have. And the way that your body does that is by making your hairs stand on end. So that's what's going on there. All right, so that is our reflex action there with the erector pili muscles and the shaft of the hair. And those are the parts of the shaft of our hair that you can see at work here. Now, not all hair is the same, folks. You actually have three distinct kinds of hair in the human body. Before you are born, you have a type of hair covering most of your body called lanugo. Lanugo is a very short, soft, very downy, unpigmented hair. It's called fetal hair. And lanugo is largely gone before birth. And if you're born prematurely, one of the things that we often see in preemie babies is that they'll have this very, very soft, unpigmented, colorless hair on a lot of the outside surface of their bodies. But it falls out very, very swiftly after they're born. So that's lanugo. Now, most of your adult hair on most of your body is called vellus. Vellus is an extremely fine, unpigmented hair. Very, very short, measured in like fractions of a millimeter oftentimes. No color to it. Most of the hair on you as an adult, or when in kids, all child hair is vellus, including longer vellus on top of their heads, which is why kids' hair is so very fine in texture, although child hair that's vellus often has some pigmentation to it. Once you hit maturity, once you hit puberty, that vellus begins to change color and texture and begins to gain some of the color that we'll have later in life. And in the adult body, vellus is going to begin getting replaced by another kind of hair, terminal hair, which we're going to talk more about momentarily. In the adult body, for most assigned female at birth individuals, most AFAB, we'll go with that, individuals, 2/3 of adult female body hair for most individuals is vellus. Only about 10% of male body hair in the adult is vellus. And again, these are broad averages. Remember what I said before, generalizations. Now, the hair on your body that you think of when you think of hair is mostly what we call terminal hair. Terminal hair mostly begins to form at puberty. Some kids get terminal hair earlier, especially on top of their heads. Terminal hair is thicker, coarser, and generally darker in color. It typically begins to form around puberty. That's when you get your hair that has the texture you expect your adult hair to possess. And that terminal hair is going to be replacing the vellus starting at puberty. There's often a color shift. When I was a little kid, I was white blonde, and as you can see, that's not how it worked out. Terminal hair replaces vellus in the axillary and pubic regions of both sexes. Hair on top of your head is terminal hair. On most of the male body, especially the chest region, the limbs, the back, and around facial hair, you get terminal hair. The female body typically gets terminal hair in isolated patches, but aside from axillary and pubic hair, and some amount of hair on the legs, gets relatively little terminal hair. And once again, this is typically an effect of the hormone testosterone. Your mileage, as I said previously, will vary. Individuals are highly variable in the amount of terminal hair that they get, depending on what is going on with their individual anatomy, their individual physiology, their individual hormone levels, and their individual genetics. Now, hair pigmentation results from pigment granules found in the cells of the hair matrix. Color will depend on the exact amounts of different pigments. There are 3 different pigments found in human hair. There are black eumelanin and brown eumelanin, which result obviously in various shades of black or brown hair, depending on the combination. There is a pigment called pheomelanin also. Low amounts of eumelanin and pheomelanin will result in blonde hair. High amounts of pheomelanin with low eumelanin will result in red hair. High pheomelanin and high eumelanin will result in what we call an auburn hair. Now, the graying or whitening of hair is called achromatopsia. That's the cessation of pigment production. It is more tied to genetics than it is to aging. It can happen in literally any age. I had a friend in college who was fully gray by the time we had graduated college. There is no clinically proven link to stress. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence suggesting that stress will cause rapid graying of hair, but there is no firm clinical study that demonstrates that more stress will cause hair to get grayer faster. There is definitely evidence that suggests that hair will get grayer or whiter faster as a result of genetics, that people who have genetic predisposition for their hair to become grayer or whiter faster seems to run in families. Pigment changes in response to puberty often happen. Pigment changes in response to malnutrition are common. Pigment changes in response to sun exposure or chemical exposure are very, very common. And that can include hormonal changes, people's hair changing color a little bit as a result of hormone therapies, result of pregnancy. These are very, very common things. Obviously, products we put in our hairs can result in pigment changes to our hair. Dietary changes can result in pigment changes to our hair. And of course, some amount of achromatopsia seems to happen to virtually everyone with age, but we do not know why. Now, hair has different growth stages. When your hair is in a growth phase, we call that anagen. Cells down at the base of the follicle and the hair matrix are constantly dividing. Much like with your skin, as new cells form, older cells are pushed further up into the shaft of the hair. As they get further from the hair matrix, they lose access to the blood supply coming in at the papilla of the hair, and those cells eventually die. Whole shaft of the hair is dead cells. Any sensation you feel is because of the part of the hair that is anchored at the base of the follicle pulling on the nerve ending there. Now, a thing that can happen is that a hair can temporarily cease growth. That is called catagen. When a hair goes into catagen, the follicle shrinks, the hair becomes loose in the follicle and may fall out. Catagen can be a temporary state. It can result from malnutrition. It can result from certain illnesses. It can result from certain drugs or radiation exposure. A lot of people have hair fall out when they're undergoing cancer therapies, as many of you know. Catagen sometimes will reverse once the underlying cause is dealt with. Like you go off the chemotherapy drugs, you get the proper nutrition, whatever else. However, sometimes catagen does not reverse. If catagen does not end, the hair follicle goes into telogen. If the follicle goes into telogen, then it becomes permanently restive. The hair gradually loses its pigmentation and may eventually fall out. This is a thing that has an age-related factor. Once you hit your 40s, gradually your hair will thin out because more and more of your hairs will gradually go into catagen or telogen. As you get older, follicles that remain active may begin to produce vellus rather than terminal hair. And this results in the hair that you have left gradually becoming thinner and thinner and may result in gradual baldness as you age. This does not happen to everybody. Not everybody's hair thins out with age. My granddad had a full, thick head of hair on my mom's side all the way up to the end of his life. On the other hand, my other granddad, went cue ball bald. So I'm waiting to find out what happens to me. But most of us are going to have some thinning of hair as we age, both from some follicles beginning to produce vellus and from some follicles simply going into catagen or telogen as we get older. Now, specialized forms of baldness, there is alopecia. Alopecia is the genetic inactivity of hair follicles, in which you have hair follicles that simply fail to produce hairs to begin with. And that means you can just straight up be born without hair. That might be just on the head, that might be on the whole body. Some forms of alopecia don't kick in until later in life, and your follicles just straight up shut down and you lose hair. There is also what is known as male pattern baldness. Male pattern baldness is a very well-known X-linked recessive disorder in which follicles become inactive in a very specific pattern, starting from the forehead and gradually working backwards, causing a kind of baldness in which you still have hair around the fringe of the head, but get that dome on top of the head that's exposed. That is an X-linked recessive disorder. So if you remember what that means from your intro bio classes, that means that it's often carried by the mother, but is then expressed more commonly in the male. Now, functions of hair. Most of your body hair is vestigial. For the most part, hair is vestigial. It is a remnant of your ancestral fur, and most of our hair is too thin to warm the body, and therefore it is a vestige. It's an evolutionary leftover that has very little function in the modern world. Things that hairs do. Hair on the body that is present, movements of it can alert us to irritants to our skin or the presence of insects or parasites. Scalp hair, the hair on top of your head, provides the top of your head with insulation. We lose a lot of body heat through our heads. There's a lot of blood flow to the head and the brain, so providing extra coverage up here protects us from heat loss. And it also protects against UV radiation. The top of your head, by definition, is more exposed to the sun than any other part of your body, and therefore providing some extra radiation shielding is a good idea. Facial and eyebrow hair serve social functions. Eyebrow hair communicates things. You all know that you can learn things about people's emotional state and what they're feeling by what their eyebrows are doing as they move around. Facial hair is a social advertiser, indicates when somebody is pubescent. And again, when people are living in social groupings, that indicates, hey, somebody is of reproductive age. It's a sign of social maturity. Which sounds ridiculous to us living in a society where we know that, by, okay, well, how old are you? But keep in mind that humans were a hunter-gatherer society at one time where we didn't keep track of calendars, and this was a thing that said, hey, somebody is old enough to be of reproductive mating age. It was a mark of adulthood, and in many hunter-gatherer and tribal societies, when a male begins to grow facial hair, that is a mark of, okay, he has become a man. Eyelashes shield your eyes when you're blinking. They help keep sun out of the eyes. They are going to help flush irritants out of the eyes, help guard you from dust and foreign particles getting into the eye. Eyebrows, doesn't seem like much, but they actually help protect your eyes from sun glare. Guard hairs in your nose are called vibrissae. They help to keep foreign particles out of the nose. Pubic and axillary hair, once again, are indicators of adulthood and sexual maturity. Keep in mind your hunter-gatherer ancestors wore a lot less clothing than you do. And furthermore, pubic and axillary hair act as a distribution system for pheromonal signals. Talk more about pheromones in a few moments when we talk about your cutaneous glands. But suffice to say that the hairs in your armpits and the pubic hair are helping to distribute scent signals that actually have to do with reproductive signaling in a way that you may not realize. So hair's got more going on than you might have thought. All right, next derivative structure of the skin. Let's talk about your nails. Now, nails, as we talked a little bit about them already, you know that nails are made out of keratin. They are made of hard keratin rather than the soft keratin found in your skin. Hard keratin, I just heard a swipe of a claw against my door. I heard a hard keratin swipe. My cat is at my door. She wants to come in and participate in this lesson. But she has claws. And nails are unique to the primate world. Other mammals have claws or hooves. Primates have nails because primates, unique in the mammal world, have highly nimble and dexterous fingers. We use our hands as tools for manipulating the environment around us in a very wide variety of ways. We are very nimble. We are able to manipulate our environments in a lot of different ways. But that means our fingertips, the trade-off is our fingertips are very, very sensitive. They have a lot of nerve endings in them. So to protect our sensitive fingertips, we have evolved nails rather than claws. And so all primates have the nail rather than the claw as a distinctive protective structure. Nails are clear, hard plates of scaly keratinized cells that are derived from the stratum corneum of the epidermis. They're made of long, thin, parallel fibers of hard rather than soft keratin, closely packed together. And if you look closely at the surface of your nail, you'll be able to see the very thin fibers of hard keratin very close to each other. They protect your fingertips from outside forces, the very sensitive tips of the fingers. Nails can also serve as a tool. We've all used our nails to dig at something or scrape at something or pick at something. And in emergencies, your nails can be a weapon. Not a very good one, but you can scratch at things to defend yourself if you have to. Fingernails grow at an average rate of about 1 millimeter per week. Toenails grow more slowly. Like your skin, the condition of your nails can indicate pathology, in particular nutritional pathologies. For example, if your nails are unusually concave or flat, they're dished out or flattened out, that often indicates an iron deficiency. And everybody, take a look at your nails right now. Do you see white spots in your nails? That's usually indicative of a mineral deficiency, particularly a potassium deficiency. And I'm here to tell you that you're probably potassium deficient. Most Americans are. It's one of the most common nutrient deficiencies in the United States, and you will be able to tell looking at your nails. If you got white spots in your nails, you're probably potassium deficient. And if you want a solution to that, eat a banana. A banana a day has on average all the potassium you need for your recommended daily allowance. So have banana every morning, and you will probably be able to deal with one of the most common nutrient deficiencies that Americans suffer from. So let's take a look at a nail, find out what they look like in cross-sectional view, just like we've been doing with our skin and our hairs. Identify the parts of a nail. Okay, here is a nail. Now we're looking at a whole fingertip here, not just a nail. So you can see some of the things going on here. Here's the bone of the fingertip, and the flesh of the fingertip here. But the things about the nail itself. Here is the skin overlapping the tip of the nail, which is often called the mantle covering the nail, or the cuticle, properly known as the eponychium. The part of the nail that is underneath the mantle is the matrix of the nail, or the root of the nail. That is the part of the nail that is live and growing. Much like your hairs, the nail is alive at the base, continual division of cells there. As new keratinized cells are pushed forward, they gradually die as they lose contact with the living tissue at the roots. Now, at the base of the nail, you see this thickened region called the lunula, or the half moon. That's what lunula means. It's that little thick white crescent-shaped area at the very base of your nail, thickened to provide protection for the nerve endings beneath it. Most of the nail is the nail plates. The nail plate is the majority of what you see when you look at your nail, covering up the tip of the finger. Beneath the nail plates is a band of connective tissue underneath it called the nail bed. The part of the nail that hangs off the tip of the finger is the free edge of the nail. There is a tiny web of collagenous fiber, connective tissue underneath the free edge of the nail, binding it to the fingertip, called the hyponychium. That's really all I have to say about nails, honestly. They're there to protect the fingertips. They have some uses as simple tools. Continually growing, that free edge grows off the tip of the nail. Obviously, we wears down naturally if you're rubbing against things, but clearly we trim them off periodically. Now, the last thing about the integumentary system, this has been a longish lesson, but the final part of the integumentary system that we want to talk about is going to be our cutaneous glands. And the cutaneous glands refers to any kinds of glands that are found in the skin and that release their secretions either onto the surface of the skin or onto the shaft of a hair. Now, cutaneous glands are all exocrine glands. Your body has two types of glands: exocrine glands and endocrine glands. An exocrine gland is any gland that releases its secretions either onto a bodily surface or into a body cavity. So, for example, your cutaneous glands are all exocrine glands, and the glands that produce, like, your stomach acids and so forth, those are exocrine glands as well, because they're releasing their secretions into the lumen of your stomach. Endocrine glands are all hormone-producing glands. They are releasing their secretions into the bloodstream. And we're going to talk about the endocrine system and all of its endocrine glands later on this semester. You do not have an exocrine system. Exocrine glands are part of other bodily systems. So all of your cutaneous glands are exocrine glands, and they're the organs of the integuments that produce a wide variety of skin secretions. You have several different types of cutaneous glands. Now, the most numerous skin glands are going to be your sudoriferous glands, better known as sweat glands. And sweat glands come in two distinct types. You might not realize this. The most common of your sweat glands, and what you're thinking of when you think of sweat glands probably, are what are properly known as eccrine or merocrine glands. You can use either name for them. Eccrine or merocrine glands are found all over your body The average person has between 3 and 4 million of them. They are found all over the place, but they are especially abundant at the base of the palms, the soles of the feet, and on the forehead. They release perspiration or sweat via exocytosis for the purpose of evaporative cooling. In other words, you release the fluid onto the surface of your skin, it evaporates away, carrying heat away with it. The heat of evaporation, the heat of vaporization of water is 587 calories, which means that every time 1 gram of sweat evaporates off your skin, it carries 587 calories of heat away with it. Remember that a heat calorie is an individual calorie, a food calorie is 1,000 heat calories, so it's not as much as it sounds like it is, but it's still helping to cool your body off. Sweat does contain things other than just water. It contains small amounts of minerals, particularly sodium. It contains small amounts of urea. So technically, there's a little bit of excretion happening in your sweat as well, but only very, very minor amounts. The myth that you're sweating out toxins is just that, a myth. That is not a way that your body deals with toxic molecules. Your liver and your kidneys are for that. Your body is using sweat for cooling purposes and incidentally releasing a little bit of sodium and a little bit of urea along with it. Now, you do this all the time. Even on cold days, you are sweating. Even on a cold day, for part of your body's natural thermoregulatory cycle, you will release as much as 500 milliliters of sweat per day. We call that tiny amount of sweat you don't even notice you're shedding insensible perspiration. Now, on hot days or when you're exercising, your level of sweating rises considerably. Visible sweat is called diaphoresis. And when it's hot out or when you're working out or exerting yourself, you might shed as much as 1 liter of sweat per hour. Now, at that point, replenishing water becomes very, very important, and also replenishing electrolytes because you are shedding sodium in the sweat. And at that point, electrolyte depletion becomes important too, which is why something like a sports drink is actually better than just pure water if you're exercising heavily. Now, there's a different kind of sweat as well. Some of your sudoriferous glands are a modified kind of sweat gland called apocrine sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands are only found in limited regions of the body. They're found in the axillary region, the anal region, the inguinal region, that is the groin, and the pubic region. They are also associated with the areolas, that is the dark pigmented area around the nipples, and with the facial hair, and to a lesser extent, the chest hair of males. Now, apocrine sweat glands produce a thicker, milkier fluid rather than conventional sweat. And their secretion is not released directly onto the skin. You don't see apocrine sweats. Rather, it's released into hair follicles and is absorbed by the shaft of the hair. Apocrine sweat is rich in scent molecules called pheromones. Pheromones are sexually stimulating scent molecules. And they are released in response to stress and in response to sexual stimuli, sexual arousal, and so forth. And what they do is basically they are advertising. They are alerting potential partners of your sexual availability. Scent signals that basically say, hey, I am sexually mature physically, not necessarily emotionally. That's a different issue. I am an available mate. I am sending out a scent signal that says I am an available mate. And that pheromone chemical found in the apocrine sweat is absorbed into the shaft of the hair. And when that hair is exposed to the air, that scent signal is distributed into the air. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that's not very effective because, my pubic hair and my axillary hair are trapped underneath my clothing. By the time anybody, is smelling that, they're already naked with me. Keep in mind that our ancestors, once again, we evolved as hunter-gatherers on the savannas of Africa. They weren't wearing a lot of clothing. Those areas were more exposed to the open. And you might think to yourself, well, natural body odor is not a very pleasing smell. Well, that's because we trap our natural scent signals underneath clothing where they tend to become stale and unpleasant. When they're exposed to the open air more, they don't tend to smell bad. They tend to become musky. And you will find that in a lot of traditional hunter-gatherer and tribal societies where people do not wear a lot of clothing, uh, tends to be a cultural attitude that a person's natural body sense is a pleasant thing and is part of what makes them attractive. Because it doesn't usually smell bad if you are exposing it to the open air a lot. And even in our society, even where we, um, again, wear a lot of clothing, scent plays a much, much bigger role in our mate choices than you might imagine. We make mate choices based on smell more than any other single factor. It's hard for us to imagine that, but there is a lot of research backing this up that somebody's scent is the single biggest factor in determining whether you are attracted to them. And we might think we're attracted based on appearance or based on personality or based on other factors, but there is a sizable body of research testing this and showing that we are much more attracted to people based on their pheromone signals than on any other single quality. And I'm happy to talk about this more at some other point in time if people are interested, but it's a little bit of a digression from the current topic. And I tend to go into more detail with it in my evolution classes. But suffice to say, humans are evolved to pick mates based on sense. Pheromone signals are where that is. And your pheromone signal is unique to you. No two people have exactly the same scent signals, straight up. We do not, which is also how, say, an animal like a bloodhound can track you based on your scents or smelling your clothing and then following that scent based on your clothing. It's from your pheromones. Now, should someone become pregnant, the apocrine sweat glands around the nipples will transform into a different kind of gland. They will become mammary glands. Now, mammary glands are not the same thing as mammae. Mammae is the formal name for breasts. The breast is not the entire mammary gland. Mammary glands are a ring of modified apocrine sweat glands found beneath the nipples that develop in the female breast prior to birth. They form during lactation and pregnancy. What happens basically is the apocrine sweat glands, starting about halfway through pregnancy, become modified. And they begin to produce, they enlarge, and they begin to produce a thicker, milkier fluid that is rich in nutrients. In other words, they begin to produce milk to feed the young. They will continue to produce milk rather than apocrine sweats for as long as the mother is nursing. Most mammals, by the way, have 2 rows of nipples that form along the abdomen, along what's called the milk line. If any of you have a dog or cat, you know that they have more nipples than we do. Humans typically only have 2. And here's a fun fact, the standard number of nipples for any sexually reproducing animal is double the normal number of young they have at once. Humans typically have 1 offspring at a time, and therefore we typically have 2 nipples. There is a condition called polythelia, in which we occasionally are born with an extra nipple or extra breast, but that is a relatively rare condition. But the mammary glands form beneath the nipples, modifying the apocrine sweat glands during pregnancy and stay active as milk producers basically for as long as nursing persists. Now, other types of glands found in human skin, there are sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are oil glands. They produce an oily fluid called sebum. Sebum keeps the skin and the hair from becoming dry and cracked. It's released directly onto the surface of the skin or directly into the hair follicle onto the shaft of the hair. You have millions of oil glands scattered around the skin. Some people have more than others. Some people's skin is naturally oilier than others. They tend to become more active at puberty. Higher testosterone levels are associated with higher activity of sebaceous glands, which is why young men often develop oilier skin at puberty. And in particular, that often leads to the clogging of pores in the skin, which can result in clogged sebaceous gland pores, can result in impacting of the oil. Bacteria can become trapped in there and form small, pus-filled blisters, which is why so many teenage boys develop acne. You have a pimple, that's typically what's happening, that you have a clogged pore in your skin, you have clogged outlet for sebum that has become blocked up, and bacteria have become trapped inside of there. And then finally, we have ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands are only found in the ear canal. There, they produce cerumen. Cerumen is better known as earwax. It's a combination of sebum and dead epithelial cells from the ear. Cerumen waterproofs the ear canal, keeps the eardrum waterproofed and flexible, and it traps bacteria and fine particles getting into the ear canal. Now, you may not realize this, but unconscious muscular actions in the ear canal will periodically push out earwax. You don't even notice it happening, but your body sheds the earwax periodically. On rare occasions, earwax can become impacted in the ear canal and partially occlude the ear canal, causing a blockage that can obstruct hearing. That is very, very rare. It does not happen that often. And you do not need to try to remedy it yourself, and in fact, should not try to remedy it yourself. If you try to remedy it yourself, you're likely to do yourself some damage. It's very easy to poke your own eardrum and harm yourself doing that. If you think you have impacted earwax, don't try to fix it yourself. Those earwax removal systems that they sell at the store will mostly do you damage or make you more vulnerable to infection by putting acids in your ears that scrub away more wax than they should and leave the eardrum vulnerable, or digging around in there. I'm here to give you the PSA. We've all done it. It feels good. Don't stick the Q-tip in your ear. You're more likely to do yourself harm. If you think you have impacted earwax, go see a doctor. They'll clear it out. Your ears are usually pretty good at self-cleaning. Okay, so those are our cutaneous glands. Now, the last thing we have to talk about before we leave the integumentary system behind, I would be irresponsible if I didn't mention it. Let's say a little bit about skin cancer. Now, skin cancer is the single most common kind of cancer in humans for the very simple reason, two reasons. One, because cancers form most easily in cells that divide more often. Cancer is by nature a disease of uncontrolled cell division. And that means that if you have any tissue where cells are naturally already dividing a lot, cancer is more likely to happen there. And the stratum basale of the skin is undergoing constant division to replace the skin cells that wear out, so it's already more vulnerable. And secondly, Cancer is more likely to happen in any tissue that is exposed to dangerous environmental forces like outside chemicals or UV radiation that would make mutations in those cells more likely. And there are no cells in the body that are getting more outside environmental damage than the cells that are on the outside of the body itself. So that combination of factors means that your skin is the single most vulnerable tissue in your body to developing cancer. Skin cancer is almost always the result of exposure to excessive ultraviolet radiation. It's most common in areas of the body that get the highest level of sun exposure. That is your face, scalp, particularly on the top of the head, tops of the ears, neck, especially the back of the neck, chest, particularly the upper chest and shoulders, arms, particularly the upper arms, legs, particularly the lower legs, and back of your hands. Skin cancer is more likely in individuals who are paler in complexion, individuals who live in very sunny regions, individuals who live in higher altitude regions where the atmosphere is thinner and therefore there's less atmospheric filtering of UV radiation. So if you live in, say, Denver, Colorado, you're at higher risk for skin cancer than if you live at sea level. If you live in Florida, you're at higher risk than here. Anybody who has excessive UV radiation exposure, and that means either you're spending lots of time out in the sun, that means you're sunbathing actively more, that means you're tanning. Do not get into a tanning bed. That is a cancer machine, my friends. It's going to mean that you have unfiltered UV radiation getting on your skin all the time. It's basically increasing your regular tanning, increases your risk of skin cancer by scary percentages. You do not need that. Plus, why would you want to be getting in a tanning bed all the time anyway? You look unnatural colors. You turn that weird orange color like Donald Trump. You are going to look weird for the time of year. You're increasing your risk of skin cancer over time by like 170% or something like that. You really don't get in a tanning bed. It's a terrible idea. If you have a family history of skin cancers, just like with any cancer, your risk goes up. If you have moles or birthmarks, those are benign skin tumors, risk factor there. And as I indicated earlier today in this lesson, keep an eye on them. You can watch out for them as a warning sign. About 20% of Americans will develop some form of skin cancer by the age of 70. It is really common. Fortunately, because it is right there on the surface of your skin, we usually notice it when it's happening. It is easy to spot. It is easy to diagnose. And usually, it is easy to treat if you catch it early, simply by excising the cancerous lesion of skin. Unfortunately, recurrence is common. If you've had it once, there's a good chance you'll get a recurrence of it. But again, it is usually fairly easy to treat when it occurs. Not a lot of people die from it unless they ignore it. The most common form of skin cancer is basal cell carcinoma, or BCC for shorts. That is cancer of the keratinocytes in the stratum basale. There are something like 4 million cases of it in the United States every single year. You also get squamous cell carcinoma, or SCC. That is cancer of the squamous cells in the higher levels of the epidermis. There's less division in the higher layers of the epidermis. You get about 1 million cases of those every year. Those are not likely to kill you. If they are caught early, they are easily treated. Again, excise the bad patch of skin, you're probably going to be pretty good. They seldom even require significant radiation. They seldom require chemo. Of the 5 million or so cases of those that occur every year, there are no more than about 2,000 deaths a year that result from those. Now, a deadlier and much more dangerous form of skin cancer is malignant melanoma. Malignant melanoma is a cancer of the melanocytes. It is a deeper form of skin cancer. It affects the melanocytes down on the stratum basale. It is more likely to occur in darker colored skin. And unfortunately, because it's happening in the deeper layers of the skin that's closer to the blood supply, it is more likely to metastasize and therefore more likely to spread to other parts of the body. Fortunately, it is much rarer. Melanocytes do not divide as much as keratinocytes. There are only about 100,000 cases of malignant melanoma every year. The mortality rate is higher. Of those 100,000 or so cases, there are about 6,800 deaths a year. So that's still not a very high mortality rate. That's less than 7% mortality rate. Once again, we still usually treat it just by excising the cancerous lesion, but it's much more likely to be deadly by the numbers than the BCC or SCC types of skin cancer. So any type of skin cancer, if you have to get a kind of cancer, skin cancer is the one you want because they're all relatively easy to treat, they're relatively easy to catch, and your odds are pretty good. But I mean, there's no such thing as a good cancer, but if you have to have one, skin cancer is probably the one you want to get. So keep an eye on your skin. Don't get in tanning beds. Don't excessively sun bathe. Put on your sun tanning. I mean, your sunblock, your sunscreen. Do proper cover if you're in the sun a lot. You can probably do your best to prevent this. And if you know you have environmental risk factors, think accordingly. Okay. So that, folks, is our look at the integumentary system. You're going to be having a quiz on the integumentary system in the near future. I'm not going to do that quiz right now for the simple reason that I want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions in class about this before I do that quiz. So the next time I see you in class, assuming that you are watching this lesson here before we have class, I will take questions about it, and then we'll have the quiz after that. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your weekend or whatever time you're watching this, and I will see you in class on Tuesday. Take care.